Hi, everybody. Thank you for waiting patiently the 12 extra minutes it took me to get on my husband's MacBook and figure all of this out. We are here with Vicki Ringer from Planned Parenthood South Atlantic. Um, and you all probably remember Sydney from different live streams we've done in the past. She's one of our interns, and we're continuing the topic of abortion as healthcare. So I'm sure we'll talk about all kinds of different facets of that, but specifically we wanted to talk about the Texas bill and the whole bounty hunter and the idea of, like vigilante violence against people for seeking abortions, no matter, what circumstance it is. So, this is Vicki's expertise, and I will go ahead and just let you, if you want to say just a few things that Planned Parenthood's doing, and then we can just go right into it.
Well, Ashlyn is selling herself short because she's certainly an expert on these issues too, and has been involved as long as I've known her. So I don't know that I could tell you much differently from what Ashlyn will say. I'm just thrilled to have a chance to talk about what we do because so few people really know exactly all the things that we do. Planned Parenthood seems to be the boogeyman for a lot of folks with regards to abortion. We're not the only abortion provider in the state, certainly not the only abortion provider nationally, but our name has been around for a long time, and so we're easy to pick on. The biggest part of our business are our healthcare centers, which provide healthcare. Abortion is part of that, but it is not the only part. We treat all patients for all their reproductive needs, and that includes men too, for birth control, for annual cancer screenings, whether it's a pap smear or testicular cancer, ovarian, cervical, breast. And men have breast, surprisingly. So all of those types of screenings. And sadly, we know South Carolina is one of the worst states in the nation, literally in every category. But in sexually transmitted diseases, we are in the top 5 or the worst 5, depending on how you pick it, for high rates of STDs. And it's not just a poor person's disease. STDs affect everybody across all socioeconomic classes. And surprisingly, one of the fastest growing groups of people impacted by STDs are folks in nursing homes, or maybe not nursing homes, but assisted living, senior citizen living. So, we all get frisky every now and then, and it's nothing wrong with it. It has to be treated. And so that's a big part of the treatment we provide. And abortion will always be a critical service for us because ultimately we don't believe that anybody has the right to decide that except the person who is impacted.
Yeah, my husband actually, so his mother, when she was pregnant, she was, not a teenager, but she was pretty young. And the Planned Parenthood up in New York is who did all of her pregnancy care. She, we didn't have insurance. She went to Planned Parenthood throughout her entire pregnancy, and they did all of the ultrasounds, everything, blood work, all of that. So I always think it's funny to hear, that the only thing that y'all do is give abortions when we know that's not even all Planned Parenthood clinics have that capability. So it can't be the only thing you guys are doing.
Absolutely. And in fact, there are still to this day a lot of Planned Parenthood health centers that do provide prenatal care. Mm-hmm. It just depends on what their setup is. Here in South Carolina, because we're in Columbia and Charleston, where there are a multitude of OBGYNs, we will refer patients to them for prenatal care. Pushing abortion on somebody when they test pregnant is not at all what we're interested in doing. We want the woman to be able to decide based on her personal situation. And we go through all the options. Have the baby and keep it, have the baby and put it up for adoption, or have an abortion. All of those are options for a pregnant person that we're going to fully discuss with them, and especially in light of how far along they are. If you're this far along, you have this option. If you're this far along, you have other options. And but one of the things that we certainly do for women who decide they want to keep their babies is to refer them to doctors who are willing to treat low-income patients for prenatal care. And in South Carolina, 60% of all pregnancies and deliveries are paid for by Medicaid. So typically speaking, once you have decided to have a baby, you could sign up for Medicaid, and you and the baby will be covered once it's born. And so that's typically not something that anybody has to worry about, is if you're uninsured, being able to afford to have a baby. You can afford the medical care, you just may not be able to afford to raise children because it's very expensive. But we will provide resources. We let patients know where they can go for job assistance and housing assistance and all the social services, the safety net protections that are available to patients. So it's never a situation where we are going to leave patients in the lurch. But you'll hear folks talk about Planned Parenthood as if we're on a street corner with a sign that says, "Get your abortions here today."
Exactly.
It's just not what we do.
And, just from a little personal story kind of experience with Planned Parenthood, my sister actually got pregnant unplanned and didn't know how to tell my parents or anything. I went with her to the facility, and Planned Parenthood is stigmatized as we want to have, give women abortions, just like that's the ultimate end goal. Where when I can tell you firsthand, being there with her, it was not like that at all. There was thorough, educated people going through the options. All right, you want to have the kid, this is what's going to happen. You want to have the abortion, that's what's going to, ultimately, I think Planned Parenthood left the decision to the patient. It didn't try to persuade or anything like that. So
you are exactly right, Sydney. And part of that is because we're a nonprofit organization. Mm-hmm. So we don't have to provide abortions in order to cover our costs.
Exactly.
People donate to Planned Parenthood so that we can provide care regardless of the decisions people make. So whether that person chooses to have the baby or have an abortion, we're going to provide that care without regards to what it costs. It's a part of our mission is to make sure that nobody goes without care, and it shouldn't be decided based on your zip code or your bank statement. Everybody should be entitled to health care, and including abortion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that a lot of people who maybe are in South Carolina, who, are watching this, they might not know that we had a lovely bill pushed through earlier this year. And, I always say that we never get the kind of attention that Texas or Florida gets. So if you wouldn't mind talk about where that bill's at, what it was, and kind of what we're waiting on right now with the other states and all of their anti-abortion bills that are also being challenged.
You bet. Back in February, the very first bill of the new session, every 2 years right after an election, a new legislative session starts, and they're 2 years, just like Congress. So January of 2021 was the start of the brand new legislative session. the very first bill out of the Senate, SB 1, number 1, was not about the pandemic. It was not about unemployment. It was not about helping people keep their homes or feed their families. It was about banning abortion. And I think even the staunchest Republican had to be scratching their head and saying, what are they doing in Columbia? Because this is not something that Republicans as a whole considers a priority. And that's another interesting part of it that I'll discuss in a little bit about polling. But they passed the so-called heartbeat bill. And let's be honest, right up front, they call it that, but it's not accurate. There is no heartbeat at that early stage because there is no heart. There are no chambers of a heart. What you can hear at early stages of embryonic development, because at 6 weeks, it's an embryo. It's not even a fetus at that point. And at 6 weeks, you can't see it or hear it except with a transvaginal ultrasound. So a lot of us think about going to the doctor and having the jelly on our belly, as they say, and rubbing that wand on the belly and looking at this screen. You can't do that at 6 weeks because there's no measurement and no weight to an embryo at 6 weeks, but you can hear fetal electrical activity because it is starting to develop. And that's what you hear. And people mistake that as a heartbeat. And the other side, the anti-abortion people, honestly benefit from saying it's a heartbeat. They want to confuse people and get them thinking, oh, it's a heartbeat, it's a baby. No, it's not a baby in there yet. It is a long way from being a baby. But once you can hear that, and with the transvaginal ultrasound, abortions are banned in South Carolina based on this law that was passed. And that occurs at about 6 weeks. If you used external ultrasound, which is rubbing the belly, it would be about 12 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks before you can hear any fetal activity. But the transvaginal ultrasound is what's required to hear early sounds from a fetus. And that's just another potential violation for women who would find that type of exam to be intrusive, because it's not always necessary, and it certainly shouldn't be required by law. There are no male exams that are dictated as to how they are to occur. Only women and only abortion does the government get involved and say, you must do this, you must do that. And immediately after that bill was signed, it passed through in record time, 18 days actually, and to pass both sides of the legislature, the House and the Senate, and to be signed by the governor. And on the very day that it was signed by the governor, we were standing on the courthouse steps, and I was calling and texting the attorney, say, go now, he just signed it. So once the governor signed it, it became law. They filed their lawsuit at that exact minute, and the judge the very next day, in fewer than 24 hours after the governor signed it, had blocked that law from going into effect because it violates Roe v. Wade. Texas thinks theirs does not violate Roe v. Wade, and we'll talk about their crazy setup. But any bill that takes away the rights of women to make their own reproductive choices is a violation of Roe v. Wade. It just is. So right now in South Carolina, this bill, there's still an injunction. They can enforce an abortion ban in South Carolina. That means abortion is still safe and legal in this state up until 20 weeks. And then the court has decided to stay this decision, which means they're going to set it aside for a while because the Supreme Court is getting ready to hear the Mississippi case on December 1st. and that's a 15-week ban. And so the district court in South Carolina says there's no sense in us trying to weave our way through this if the Supreme Court's going to make a ruling one way or the other that could impact that. So the bill is stopped. There is no law banning abortion in South Carolina right now, but we're all just watching cautiously about what the Supreme Court's going to do, because 50 years of having rights to abortion, to think that the Supreme Court is going to come up now and say, no, we're going to take that away from you. That's kind of hard to swallow. And it's especially hard to accept because too few people are involved politically. They don't recognize that their reproductive rights are at stake. I don't need an abortion today, so I'm not thinking about abortion. Typically, those of us on the front lines of this type of work think about it every day and recognize how fragile our rights are. But we have got to engage voters to vote and vote out all these people that would take away our rights. There was a poll just announced today from Washington Post and ABC News that 60% of all people that were polled support Roe v. Wade as the law of the land. But 75% said, regardless of their opinion on abortion, the government should not get in the way of a woman and her doctor in making decisions. So even if I was opposed to abortion, it's still not my business. It's not government's business. Nobody should get involved with it except the woman and her doctor. And that's just the common feeling. So we've got a few legislators who really push their beliefs about abortion on everybody else when it is not popular politically, morally, or emotionally in South Carolina. And while that was a national poll, the numbers are actually even better in South Carolina. 84% believe that abortion should be safe and legal in this state, at least in some cases. Only 16% believe that abortion should just be illegal across the board. 16%.
Wow.
But I know, it's amazing.
Shock, but that's a good shock.
Every single Republican, with the exception of, maybe a few, vote to ban abortion when there's just no demand for that. Mm-hmm. It's a culture war. It's been a fundraising call for many of them, and it's honestly taking advantage of bodily autonomy for all of us.
Mm-hmm. So what are you concerned about the Supreme Court case? How do you feel going into that? We've got a couple weeks and then it'll be here.
I think the difficult thing is now is the makeup of the court, obviously. Mm-hmm. Trump got to pick 3 Supreme Court justices, and from the get-go, he let the Federalist Society decide. And he also said he would only appoint justices who would overturn Roe. So, the Federalist is only going to give them the names of judges who have a record as opposing abortion. So we got Kavanaugh, we got Barrett, and we got Gorsuch. And I think all 3 of them are Catholic, and they have all been involved and written decisions that impact reproductive rights. Gorsuch was involved in the Hobby Lobby case that says Hobby Lobby is a religious person and doesn't have to pay for birth control for its employees because they're opposed to it. They're opposed to birth control for employees. But that's just how extreme. And of course, we've always known that Alito and Clarence Thomas have always been opposed to it. John Roberts at least on some of the cases so far, has been kind of a swing vote, but there's only 3 liberal justices right now. So it doesn't look good, because I think that the conservative judges, well, you can't even call them conservative, extremist judges will work themselves into pretzels, try and find a way to overturn Roe. I think the Chief Justice Roberts believes in the power of precedents, and that, for 50 years we've been operating on this, and so it should remain. And multiple court cases have been decided based on that. So a lot of cases involving privacy and bodily autonomy come into play. And if Roe comes down, then there are other cases that would likely fall too. So it is very concerning, because we don't know what's going to happen with these 3 new judges. We know about Thomas and Alito because they've shown us time after time where they fall on these decisions. But it's a little scary. Now, one thing that people need to remember is overturning Roe does not by itself ban abortion. What it does is make it a state decision. See, back before Roe, there were quite a few states that had legal abortion. But Roe said you shouldn't be restricted to your health care or your decisions based on your zip code. So no states can restrict abortion prior to viability. And so if Roe is overturned, what that means is each state can decide for itself. And we know there will be some states, the blue states, California, New York, New Jersey, Virginia, that will keep abortion legal. We know South Carolina will be one that immediately will ban abortion in this state. So everything is kind of on the line.
So realistically, I think Sydney was going to ask about like that, exactly what you just answered. And it's like ESP going on. So it's great. But what would that like be for someone who wants an abortion in South Carolina? It's illegal here. Going out of state, do you think that there would be like repercussions for people to access abortion elsewhere? Do you think that they would kind of go into what Texas is doing here, or do you think that we're just not that animalistic?
Oh, no, we are just exactly that cruel as Texas. A couple of options there. And we have heard legislators say that they were really impressed with the Texas bill, and that they were eager to introduce the same type bill here in South Carolina, and to, since it apparently had won the approval of the Supreme Court, which it hasn't, but the Supreme Court has failed to act, they're pretty eager to do it. We also have others who are kind of hemming and hawing about it. Oh, I don't know. I've got to examine that law from Texas. So part of it with Republicans has been its messaging. We're going to talk about how pro-life we are, when actually we're anti-abortion, anti-women, let's face it. And we're going to hope that this doesn't really pass, because then my constituents are going to be upset. I get to promote it as a pro-life person, but I don't really think it's going to pass. And so abortion's still going to be legal, and we can just go on about our business. Well, that changed with the election of 2020. The Senate wasn't able to stop the House from their crazy selves. The House is just some conglomeration of really odd people in there, and some really great representatives, some really odd ones. So that's a possibility, that South Carolina will create an enforcement mechanism like Texas, the bounty hunter part, where everybody can sue providers, doctors, nurses, clinical staff, receptionists, anybody who works in a health center or abortion clinic. You can sue the taxi cab driver. You can sue a lawyer who might be advising a patient about their legal rights. You could sue a parent who gave a daughter money to get an abortion, or a boyfriend who gave money. The only person that can't be sued is the actual pregnant woman herself. And that is their way of saying, oh, we're so sympathetic. No, that's not sympathetic. But anybody, they don't have to be connected to the patient or to the doctor. They don't even have to be in the state of Texas. They can sue for damages anybody who is involved and helps with obtaining an abortion once cardiac activity is heard. So, and here's the kicker. The minimum payout is $10,000, just the minimum. It's not the maximum, it's the minimum. And they can get legal fees and court fees paid for by the doctor or whoever they sue. So it can get pretty high. And in fact, during the Supreme Court argument about this, Brett Kavanaugh says, well, what would stop them from awarding $1 million? You know, and what would stop people from doing this for gun laws? You know, a blue state could say, all right, we're not going to allow certain types of weapons in our state. And because the state can't pass laws to restrict guns, we're going to let the public enforce gun laws and say, if you sold a gun, if you bought a gun, you've broken the law and you've got to pay me $1 million.
So how do you think that, I'm so sorry, I didn't want
Go ahead. Go ahead.
How do you think that they're going to be able to prove that someone
helped with an abortion?
Yes.
I think they would probably be able to subpoena health records. I think that would be difficult because of confidentiality of medical records.
Mm-hmm.
I know that one doctor in Texas wrote an editorial for the Washington Post saying, I did get an abortion. I mean, I did provide an abortion because I think my patients deserve that level of care. And the doctor said he also wanted to speed up the legal process. And right after that article in the Washington Post appeared, he was sued by some attorney in Arkansas who knows nobody in Texas. But he says he wanted to prove the case is unconstitutional too. But it's a bunch of just odd people that are getting involved with suing. And it's going to be the extremists, the ones who believe that abortion should be banned in all cases, even in cases where a woman's life is at risk, where she's been raped, where she's the victim of incest. You know, they don't think that any of those abortions should be legal either. And only God can decide who's going to live. So if I'm pregnant, I have developed some type of high blood pressure that is impacting my health, and I should not carry a pregnancy to term, or I've got a fast growing cancer that needs to be treated with chemotherapy immediately. Those people don't think that I should have the right to an abortion to save my own life, that I have to save the fetus first, that the fetus is the priority and not myself. So that's how extreme they are. How they prove it, they don't have to prove it in court. That's the slippery thing about this bill. Typically in court, prosecutors have to prove that you did something. I'm innocent until proven guilty. This Texas law is you're guilty until you can prove that you're innocent. So it's up to the doctors and the other healthcare providers to prove that they did not provide an abortion. So and how do you prove a negative? It's one of those things that just makes no sense. There's nothing that's reasonable about that law in any way. Nothing.
Yeah, it's my mind is just blown. And so basically someone in like Oregon could sue someone, a doctor, and anyone could sue anyone in Texas. You don't have to be living in Texas. You could have seen something online, and then there you go. Now you have a case, apparently. Wow.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh my goodness.
And you don't even have to know the patient. South Carolina legislators have typically written laws that ban abortion, and it allows sperm donors, the men who got the women pregnant, who so often can get away scot-free with anything. But the biological father, the sperm donor, parents, grandparents, siblings, they can all sue the doctor if a female in their family had an abortion because they were harmed. I didn't get to see my niece in the future, so I'm suing that doctor. And that's all just kind of ridiculous too. It's just assuming things about people and their level of involvement that would be acceptable to anyone. I don't care how much you want a baby or how little you want a baby. You don't want your in-laws or your parents or your siblings telling you what you must do. It's just, and most wouldn't think of it, It's just crazy.
And another question I have for you is, so they're trying to put in legislation of abortions, all this, but are they doing anything then for after abortions per se?
No.
Exactly. People have abortions for their own reasons, and I feel like if you prevent that, then you need to be supplying for their like what comes further along, the issues that come further along, whether it be therapy for having a rape or your medical care because you can't afford it.
Right. Yeah. Senator Mia McLeod introduced a bill called the ProBirth Accountability Act right after a heartbeat bill was introduced in 2019. And she introduced it again last year too. But that bill would require the government to pay for all medical care, all education, housing, clothing, food, support for a child until the age of 18. So if we're going to force women to give birth, then it becomes our responsibility to provide for the care of those children. Because what we often say is the anti-abortion people are pro-birth and not pro-life. In fact, you will even hear advocates who are nuns I think one of my favorite meme is a nun who says, unless you're willing to care for these children after they're born, don't tell me you're pro-life, because we don't see the care. I don't know if you've ever seen that skit that George Carlin does, but it's like, if you're pro-life, woo-wee, but after you're born, you're screwed. And that's kind of how it is now. You can't have an abortion, and especially if you can't afford a child, we're not going to be supporting you for the rest of your life. Get up off your butt and go get a job and support your own kids.
That really is what it is. They have a problem with everything. And it kind of all contradicts itself because you don't want people to have abortions, but then you also don't want to provide like more assistance for people who need the help. And a lot of the times those folks are also pro death penalty. So it's just like, whose life are you caring about? Because you're certainly not caring about everyone's life.
Yeah, exactly right. In fact, when they were debating the bill on the death penalty this year, when they were talking about bringing back the electric chair and firing squad, one legislator from Charleston did stand up and say, that this seems very disingenuous. If we're going to vote for an abortion ban because we're so pro-life, for us then to turn around and find ways to make it easier to kill people, I can't support that. So at least there was someone who was consistent in their beliefs. There's only one senator that I know of who he's Catholic, and he supported, he voted to ban abortion, but he also voted to ban the death penalty. So he's the only one I know that has actually followed what Catholic beliefs are. People want to talk about their religion, but other than Catholics, there aren't any established religions that strictly ban abortion. In fact, most denominations have specific principles or guidelines that say it's up to a woman and her doctor, a woman and her family, and the church should not get involved except as requested. And that's where most churches fall. So, so many of these Republicans talk about how much they love Israel. We're so pro-Israel. Israel pays for abortions for all the women in their country, pays for them.
Shoot,
and
you
of course,
tell them that all the tax dollars we send to Israel
exactly
do that. So, man,
yes,
yeah.
billions of dollars that we send to Israel every year, and Israel pays for all the abortions in their country. And here in the United States, legislators complain about having to pay Medicaid reimbursement for somebody who got a pap smear. It's so ridiculous. Again, that says we don't know what we're talking about, but let's all hate on Planned Parenthood, and that makes it okay. We will send billions to Israel so that they can pay for abortions in their country, but we're going to take $85,000 away from Planned Parenthood in South Carolina so that they can no longer help Medicaid patients. It's crazy.
So on the first, when the Supreme Court starts to hear that case, let's just pretend scenario here that they say, okay, this is not unconstitutional. We are going to let you ban abortion at 15 weeks. What would be the next step for South Carolina? Because since that bill is like 6 weeks, I think, would they have to argue that in court, or would they go and try to pass a 15-week ban in the meantime?
It's going to depend on really how the Supreme Court rules. They may decide that the viability standard is no longer acceptable, but that there has to be something that states can rely on, that patients can rely on. It would be hard for me to imagine them just picking an arbitrary number of 15 weeks, which arbitrary it is. There's no situation in which a fetus can be born and survive at 15 weeks. It's not physically possible. The earliest that we know about is at 21, 22 weeks. And even then, even at 26 weeks, it's only a 50% chance. that a fetus can survive outside the womb at that point. I mean, to talk about viability, that's the point at which there's a 50-50 chance of survival. And for some women, no matter how long their pregnancies are, viability will never be real, because miscarriages are a real thing. And in fact, roughly 50 to 75% of all pregnancies end in miscarriage. We think it's also natural. But what happens is they happen early in the pregnancy, where a fertilized egg fails to implant, or and the woman never realizes that she was pregnant, because it will then slough off and have a period just like we normally would. So, and oftentimes that period is you're having a miscarriage and you never realized you were pregnant. One of the things that we do expect to happen this year in South Carolina, and only because they've talked about it, it's one of their big things, is what we call a trigger law. And that would be writing a law right now that says, in the event that Roe v. Wade is overturned by the Supreme Court, then abortion will become immediately illegal at all stages in South Carolina. And so there's about 26 states that have some version of that, or we know will pass that. So half of the states will immediately make it impossible for women to get abortions. But what do we know? Women with means, almost always wealthy white women, are going to be able to travel anywhere in the world and get an abortion. They can fly up to New York and spend the weekend, or go to California and get an abortion. It is the people who can least afford to have a child, who cannot afford to travel out of state to have an abortion, because let's face it, it's going to be expensive. Like North Carolina currently, they had a legal abortion prior to Roe v. Wade in 1973. And so they can presumably take some of our patients if it's overturned here. But even in North Carolina, what you're looking at is a 72-hour waiting period. So say I live in Columbia or Myrtle Beach, I've got to travel to North Carolina for my first appointment, and I'll have an ultrasound then. And then I have to go back home and wait 3 days, and then come back to that clinic, and only then can I get an abortion. So, and because most places aren't open every day, you've a 3-day waiting period often turns into a week-long waiting period. You have to pay for your travel, you have to pay for childcare, you have to take time off from work. And for most women, that means they have no sick leave or paid time off. So they're losing pay for the first day of an appointment, the second day of the appointment. They may have to have a hotel room. They may have to take a bus or a train, or pay somebody, or rent a car. And we know that 60% of all women who have abortions already have a child. So they're going to have to worry about childcare. And it just puts more and more burdens, where typically right now an abortion is about $500. And that's pretty universal across the country. Certainly in some places it's going to be more expensive depending on what doctors can command in their areas. But in Columbia and Charleston at our clinics, it's about $500. People can review the counseling on one day online, and 24 hours later, they can come to our clinic. They may have to have a day off. They may have to have transportation for one day. So already there's extra expense. But what they don't have to do is travel out of state for days on end to find a place where they can get an abortion. We've seen that with the women in Texas going to Oklahoma and New Mexico and Arizona. And those states are so swamped with Texas patients coming in, they haven't been able to serve the women in their own states. So it's going to create this incredible domino effect that will impact the 24 states where abortion will be protected, will be inundated with patients from the 26 states that have decided they're going to ban it. And that's something that they seem to be fine with. So to me, that says I'm not here to protect children. I'm just going to make sure there's no abortion in South Carolina. If she wants to go out of state, I don't care. She's just not going to get it here. And again, it's going to impact those who can least affect it and least afford it, or those who are proportionately impacted by already a restrictive healthcare system that denies access to those who don't have money, who don't have insurance. And that is often Black and brown people, LGBTQ people, those who have been marginalized in society, have been marginalized in jobs and healthcare and all the other equitable rights that many of us have taken for granted for 50 years. It is systemic, and you can't disconnect racism from abortion or inequality from abortion, homelessness, drugs, healthcare access. They are all so intersectional.
So what about the myths about late-term abortions, that you can only have them in life or death situations, kind of?
Yeah, what you'll often hear from the other side, and we refer to these as abortions later in pregnancy, because there are some people who would call an abortion at 10 weeks a late-term abortion, when obviously you're still in the first trimester. There's nothing late-term about that. So late-term is kind of a subjective definition. And so we say later in pregnancy. And what happens, because they attempt to damn the women who have those, but 99% of those later abortions are because in situations where it was a baby that was planned for, a baby that was desperately wanted, and either the baby or the woman had a diagnosis that made continuing that pregnancy untenable. There are quite a few diagnoses for fetuses that aren't compatible with life. They will not survive outside the womb. Or if they do survive, they will be, and this is a horrible word, but unable to tend to, I'm not going to even use it because it's difficult, but they'll have no ability to care for themselves, to express themselves. They'll have to be fed through tubes and be on oxygen. And most of us would say that's not a life. And we would not want our own children to go through that. So those are always the things that people do. They have to consider. In South Carolina, 20 weeks is the cutoff. And it wasn't until 20 weeks when I had my diagnostic ultrasound. And that's where they look at everything. They do tests to see if there are any types of anomalies or something wrong, to see if the fetus can survive. Is this going to be a healthy child? And that didn't come until 20 weeks. And for some women, that might even come later. And then you've got to wait for testing. You might want to get a second opinion. So at 20 weeks, you typically can't make that decision. The South Carolina law as it stands now allows patients to have abortions after 20 weeks for a fetal diagnosis and to save the life of the woman. But many states don't allow that at all. And there are some doctors who won't provide that because it's just not their level of expertise. So women will often have to fly to other states to get that an abortion later in pregnancy. But South Carolina's hospitals also provide those abortions. And, we don't talk about that. Nobody talks about the hospitals doing it because, one, we don't want that care taken away. We want people to continue to be able to go to hospitals for that care. And we don't want anybody to be stigmatized because they provide abortion. So the patients that hospitals treat are often victims of rape and incest because they are generally traumatized people who deserve a higher level of anesthesia than you would get at Planned Parenthood, and especially if they're children. They just need to be put to sleep for any type of procedure rather than suffer any pain whatsoever. And then, of course, if there's a fetal diagnosis that does come later in pregnancy, only a hospital can provide an abortion after 20 weeks in this state. So it can be pretty devastating no matter which way. And I mention anesthesia because at Planned Parenthood, we will provide sedatives, and pregnant abortions are provided through 13 weeks at our health centers, so through the first trimester. And at that point, the procedure is simple. You might feel some cramping, but there's no real pain, or the pain is very limited. Everybody's threshold for pain is different, but for the most part, it's fairly limited. Most people get up, leave, go to work the next day, and they're fine. But for other procedures that require more anesthesia, the law says you have to have an anesthesiologist on staff and a nurse anesthetist. That's always the hardest word to say.
I know.
And we just can't justify that level of staffing at this point because in South Carolina and across the nation, 99% of all abortions in South Carolina are in the first trimester. Mm-hmm. So all of this rigmarole about rules and cutting it off only really impacts 1% of abortions, because even people who are generally opposed to abortion find that a first trimester abortion is acceptable. Mm-hmm. I think even those folks would say it's just not a baby at that point. It's so small as to be unidentifiable. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't call that a baby any more than you would call an egg a chicken, or say a caterpillar is a butterfly. It has the potential to get there, but mm-hmm. that's not where we are now.
Right. I know that they use the phrase late-term abortion to kind of set off people's emotional, whatever's going on in their mind. And, our former disgraced president, I recall him saying yes. something like they have abortions up until the baby's due. And I'm just like, people actually believe this. I read the comment section of the local news on Facebook, and I see people commenting on like WPDE when they post something, and some people honestly believe that is, done.
Reading the comments is the worst.
Sometimes I'm looking for dopamine, and I want to fight.
Because you're exactly right. And
mm-hmm.
and especially when it's women who have given birth, mm-hmm. should know that this is not a thing.
Right.
But what we know about politicians, they know it's not a thing either.
Mhm.
But if they lie enough, people believe them, just like the whole thing about the 2020 election. The big steal, the election was stolen.
Mhm.
Trump really won by a landslide. They have said it enough that every single month, more and more Republicans believe that when
Mhm.
there's absolutely no evidence of it. But if you keep saying it, people start to believe it. And that's the thing about abortions later in pregnancy. And I can remember the debate when Trump said, yes, they're having babies. They're going in and having an abortion the day before a baby is due.
Mhm.
And even Hillary Clinton said, that's not a thing. That's called childbirth.
Right.
Because there's not a doctor in the world who's going to do an abortion one day before delivery. One,
Mhm.
it's illegal in all 50 states. The current law is viability. And the only exceptions around viability would be to save my life or if the fetus can't survive.
And at
So
that
those
point,
are
you
the
still have
only
to
two
give
exceptions.
birth. You'd still have to birth the,
Exactly.
it's like it would be like a stillbirth. The baby wouldn't have been.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
you're totally right about, the ultrasound screening at 20 weeks, the anatomy scan. For me, I had to go back at like 26 weeks because having twins, they were,
Yes.
harder to see. I had to travel down to Charleston to get that level of, care with their, the better machines that they had, the better screening.
Sure.
And one of the twins was, just like hiding his little heart. So they're like, everything looks, okay, but we're gonna have to have you come back just so we can make sure that his heart is fine because he was hiding. So his knees were like up, up here, and they couldn't see everything they needed to see. So at 26 weeks, if something would have been, awfully wrong, and then I don't have that option to do what I might need to do anymore because
Right.
it's the 20-week cutoff. It doesn't make much sense to me.
Exactly. And anyone who has had children or loves someone who has know what that is like, waiting to find out if the news is good or is this something we need to worry about. And it can be devastating to just sit and wait. And by rushing people, by having those arbitrary cutoffs at 15 weeks or 20 weeks, what that does is it typically forces people to make a decision that they might not have made if they had more time. And we heard this from women in Texas that, I didn't have the luxury of time to make a decision. So I made the decision to have an abortion. Whereas if I'd had more time to think about it, to consider my resources, to talk to my family, how would they support me? I might have chosen something different. But when you force me, if I have to make a decision by the 20th week, or if I have to make a decision in Texas by the 6th week, I'm going to make a decision that I might not have made if I had more time to think about it.
Right. And that, it seems like they want a lot of loopholes for people to have to jump through to even like get this access in the first place. Like you mentioned, having to have an ultrasound done first in some cases, and then you have to wait 24 hours before you can schedule it. It creates a big burden that they're obviously meaning to place on people in order to reduce, people's access.
And
Absolutely.
if they cut off access forever, let's say this passes, will that ultimately stop abortions or?
And Sydney, you asked the magical question because that's always been something that we try to tell people, that overturning Roe v. Wade or banning abortion doesn't stop abortion. It just stops legal ones. And it, in many cases, can stop safe ones because people will do whatever they need to do. whether that's ordering medicine online from somebody that they may not know and may not be effective medicine. It could be fake, or traveling to an unknown doctor, or traveling out of state. People are, since the beginning of time, abortion has existed. And it actually didn't become illegal in our country until the late 1800s, and then only in some states. And the reason why, it won't surprise anyone, is that doctors were losing business to midwives. So they wanted to make sure that the midwives weren't helping women have abortions. Also, women were getting uppity about their rights, and they wanted to vote, and they wanted to have jobs, and they wanted some say in their lives. And the white men just weren't going to have that. So let's make abortion illegal. And that way they've got to stay at home and have more children. They can't go out in the workforce. And also, prior to birth control and abortion being legal, childbirth was one of the leading causes of death for women. It is still incredibly high. And in fact, it's higher than any other industrialized country in the world. Texas is the number one worst maternal mortality place. You are more likely to die in childbirth in Texas than you are to die in childbirth in Vietnam, or any Africa, any other place in the world that does not have the level of health care that we have. But we are just not providing health care to everyone. We're very selective about who can get health care. You have to afford it, or you have to be incredibly poor, and not even make minimum wage. Because if you make minimum wage, that's too rich for Medicaid.
Yeah.
And what can you afford at $7.25 an hour?
Nothing. You can't. It's wild to see what the threshold is for getting on Medicaid in South Carolina. Like, you have to
exactly.
You have like half a job.
It's about $12,000 or $13,000. If you have more than that, you don't qualify.
Yeah.
But they do, because the federal government pays for most of it, cover pretty much. There's a much bigger threshold for when they'll cover childbirth and delivery for women who aren't insured. And they do that for 30 days after delivery. You know, you don't get care any more than that, to have that baby and be done with it, and then we don't care about you.
Yeah, there's a whole lack of support. Definitely a lack of support for the after, if someone has a child. And across the whole entire country, we don't have any sort of setup for new parents, which clearly can be a reason for someone not wanting to continue a pregnancy. But the fact that it is just dangerous in and of itself to be pregnant is a reason enough. I just don't think anyone really needs to have a reason. Like, their reason is just that they want one, and that's it.
Absolutely. Well, and one of the things that drives me is my great grandmother died in childbirth, delivering twins, as a matter of fact. And I always hate to say that to the mother of twins, but it's a high risk pregnancy for everybody. But she had already had 10 children. Because this was the early 1900s. And my grandmother was 12 when her mother died. So she was the oldest girl in the family, and she was left to take care of all of her brothers and sisters, including an infant, because one of the twins died in childbirth and one of them survived. And so my grandmother, at the age of 12, had to take care of 10 siblings beside herself. And her father worked in a farm and was gone from sunup to sundown. But that's how dangerous pregnancy could be. And with each resulting pregnancy, it becomes more dangerous.
Yeah.
Women didn't know how to prevent pregnancy. There was no birth control. There's certainly wives' tales about how you could prevent it, but there was no legal birth control.
Mhm.
But nowadays, and my belief is this too, if you can die from pregnancy and childbirth, no one should have the right or the ability to force you to be pregnant or to give birth.
Mhm.
I can't force you to donate a kidney to me. I
Mhm.
can't force you to give blood to me. You might be the only matching donor in the world if I need a liver or a kidney,
Mhm.
but no one can make you give it to me,
Mhm.
even if I'm going to die tomorrow, because that just makes sense as to where we are. But
Mhm.
we can force women, because what it truly is donating their bodies as incubators for a fetus to survive. And
Mhm.
for many of us, we never give it any thought. This is just when we decide we want to have a baby.
Mhm.
It's just natural that we're going to do this. But, and this is something I think so many people forget too. They'll say, why didn't she just use birth control?
Mhm.
Most do. And birth control fails.
Yep.
You even on birth control pills, it'll say like 98% effective.
Mhm.
So there are always risks that something will happen. A condom could be expired and have a crack or a split in it. The birth control pill, you might have been on an antibiotic that hurt the effectiveness of birth control pills. A diaphragm, spermicide,
Mhm.
IUD, all of those things can fail.
Yep.
And so even the most protected people can experience pregnancy while trying very hard not to. That doesn't mean that their rights should be taken away from them, even if they weren't using birth control.
Right.
And you'll often hear this too. It's more shaming of women. And we've heard this from pastors in legislative hearings saying, well, if they'd have just kept their legs together, this wouldn't have happened.
Mhm.
And why is it always the women?
It
Why
takes
is it
two
that the
people.
men? Yeah. Why couldn't the men have just stayed away or
Mhm.
or a condom? But it all goes back to one, let's shame women.
Mhm.
Um, Women are there for men's pleasure. Sex is there for producing children, and women should just shut up and do it. And if they do it, they certainly shouldn't enjoy it.
Right.
And that's just, there's so many years and years of male egos that go into that, and misguided religious thoughts that,
Mhm.
you know, you can have sex, but you can't enjoy it.
Yeah.
Men can, but women can't enjoy it.
They do a good job of indoctrinating the kids at church, especially in the white evangelical churches. It's like a slow process to like get away from something like that. And I feel like they hit on abortion more than they hit on anything else that they oppose. So it's just like, if that's, so many people are one issue voters who are anti-abortion, and that's their thing. Getting them to kind of wake up and realize like you've been fed a bunch of propaganda is frustratingly hard. But you mentioned men, and that actually brings me to a question that I wanted to ask you. So, in this new fight to make sure that our rights are protected, and that we, get to decide what happens to our bodies, what would you like men to be doing?
Well, and this is always touchy, because men will say, I want to support you. I want to do whatever you need me to, but I feel like women need to be front and center in this argument, and we just need to amplify your voices. So I'm going to take a back seat and just promote and support you. And there's a lot of reasoning behind that when we're talking about Black Lives Matter and gay pride and LGBTQ issues. Me as a straight white woman should not be up there talking about those issues. I should be elevating and amplifying the voices of the people who know those issues best. So there's a certain understanding about men not wanting to take center stage on that. But we also know that until men start speaking up as much as women, it's not going to have as much of an impact. Men need to speak up and say, it's not our place. And let's be honest, there are amazing men. They think that all of us who are feminists or supportive of reproductive rights, that we hate men. I love men, have always loved men, and am fortunate that I've always been surrounded by very supportive men who would not dream of telling me what to do. I would probably be a very different person if I had not been told that I could do anything I want. And it is my decision to make those calls for my own self. But I think men, particularly with legislators, they need to talk to legislators and say, man, you got to quit doing this. You're giving us all a bad reputation. And I've also, there was a play many years ago, Lysistrata, I think is the name of it, where all the women refused to have sex with men until the men fixed some problem that was in their community. And that has been my thing. You know, all women should refuse to have sex until the men call all the lawmakers and say, y'all got to stop this. And I think that would fix it in just 5 minutes flat. Of course, people tell me that, you know, Vicki, not everybody's going to go along with that. And I said, I know, but a girl can dream, can't she? So I do think always men should not be shy about speaking out, because reproduction does take two. And if women are forced to give birth, then men are forced to be parents before they want to be parents. They may be forced to pay child support that they don't want to pay. And that's, you know, all the responsibilities. Well, most of the responsibilities are always going to fall onto the woman, but there will be new responsibilities for the man that they may not want. And just as a matter of saying, it's a two-way street, reproduction, they should speak up about it as well. And until they do, I think we're all going to continue, because they're going to say, oh, women, they're so emotional. And that's just generally not the case. Yeah,
I definitely agree. I think years ago I probably would have said for them to just like shut up and go away and leave me alone. But at this point in time, I feel like they need to be talking to their friends or their family, or like you said, legislators, because they'll listen. You know, dudes are going to listen to other men instead of listening to us. So
exactly. And we see this during legislative committee meetings. We try to put a variety of people speaking about their circumstances. But unless you are a white man standing in front of those legislators talking about your beliefs, they tend to overlook us. And it's hard to believe in 2021 that that's where we stand. And there are a couple of religious so-called leaders who speak on every abortion bill. And Senator Marlon Kempson quizzed one of them during one of the hearings. He says, you know, this is like the third time I've seen you up here and always talking about abortion. When was the last time you were up here to talk about expanding health care to poor people in your community? Or providing more food banks or food stamps to people in your community, affordable housing. And he says, well, I kind of do that in my own community, but we've never seen you up here advocating for that as you have been advocating to ban abortion. And he was kind of stunned. The pastor didn't know what to say, but that was so true. It was just such an obvious question. And something that I remind them all, because there's always the leader of the Baptist Association who comes and speaks. Prior to Roe v. Wade, it was the Southern Baptist Convention that helped pay for marketing and campaigns to legalize abortion, because they saw so many women dying from illegal, unsafe abortions provided by doctors who were not set up to, may not have even been doctors, but quacks, saying they could do an abortion and couldn't. Women were dying. And so the Southern Baptist Convention, because they cared about people living, said, we've got to legalize abortion, make sure it's safe and legal for our people so they're not dying. And until the late 70s, early 80s, that was their stance. They supported abortion. And then all of a sudden, Jerry Falwell decides we've got to pick an issue that's going to make Republicans join us. And the real issue was segregated schools. They did not want to have to integrate schools, especially their white schools. They did not want Black people attending their schools, but they knew they couldn't do that in a church and get away with it or be considered racist. So what else can we do that's going to fire up our base? And abortion became the issue. And that's where we are today.
Oh, man. That is, a lot. It's a lot. I have one last question, but I want to see if Sydney has anything she wants to ask before I go ahead and wrap it up.
I think I'm okay. I just want to thank you so much for
We've talked about it all, haven't we, Sydney?
Yeah, really. I think you definitely, being a woman in college who, might start my life soon, might not with that. It's important to know these things and get involved with it. So definitely thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Well, Sydney, when you go to law school, you can take up this fight. Yes. Oh, so my last question is, what should people prepare for, and how should they move forward to continue this fight for our bodily autonomy?
Well, one thing they can do is support abortion funds, including the Palmetto Abortion Fund, started by this wonderful woman here. And others, I'm sure, but support abortion funds, which will help provide coverage, pay for expenses, pay for the medicine for women who have to go out of state if abortion is banned. Planned Parenthood also does that. We will help cover expenses for patients that have to go out of state and cover travel. We're coordinating volunteers to drive. That's happening now in Texas. But the biggest thing is do not be afraid to tell your legislator, tell your neighbors, and it might open your eyes that you have neighbors who think just like you do. They just don't talk about it. And I found that out during the election season. I put signs in my yard about who I was supporting, and neighbors were texting and Facebook messaging me. Oh, I love that you put that up. I didn't know anybody else was like me in this neighborhood, because it's such a Republican county. And so talk to people. Generally abortion is not something that you're standing around at a dinner party or at mommy and me gatherings with your children. It's just not. But find a way to say, have you heard about what they did in Texas? That's just horrible. And that's an easy way to ease into this conversation. But always, until we get legislators to change their minds, we're going to be stuck with these extreme bills. So the more racket you can make, you know, make a ruckus. That's what it is. Throw a fit. Make sure that people are listening to you. And then and only then will we be able to change things.
I think that's good advice. And everyone, you can always follow Planned Parenthood South Atlantic to see their social media accounts, always posting what's happening in the various states that they cover. And we will see what happens when December 1st comes, and I'm sure there will be updates then.
Absolutely.
To briefly just mention the abortion fund that Vicki brought up. So my friend Deidre had the idea months ago. She was just like, hey, we should do this. Like, I really want to start an abortion fund. So, I thought about it for months. I was busy. She was busy. And then it kind of just seemed like now we needed one. It was the time to start one. So that is what we have going on right now. We're still talking to people to bring them on like the board/steering committee to get things going. We have money now sitting there in the bank that we will use to do whatever is necessary for someone to get an abortion. Her idea of the whole thing originally was just that, we don't only just give them money to pay for their abortion, but, if they need to pay for childcare or if they're missing work that day and they're going to be losing money from that, or they need to travel, say they live in, I don't know, Horry County, and then they have to drive to Columbia or Greenville, or I don't know if Charleston has a clinic or not, but, it's not, they're all at least 2 hours away.
Right.
So it's not just an easy drive, a quick drive. And there's lots of hurdles that people can have. So that is what we're working on. It's called the Palmetto State Abortion Fund. And if you would like to get involved, feel free to look it up and reach out to us. We'll be working with Planned Parenthood. The Carolina Abortion Network is mostly out of North Carolina, but they do operate a little bit in South Carolina. And there's a few other things going on in the Southeast, which, we need more attention here. That's
Right.
just all I can say is that the South needs more love. So,
Absolutely. And I thank you for what you're doing because it's so important.
yeah.
The people who need help the most are the last ones to get it.
Mhm.
And so donate to the abortion fund, donate to Planned Parenthood.
Mhm.
Do what you can to help women live their best lives with
Mhm.
whatever decision that they make. And that's the bottom line.
And also, this just brings up a quick little story I read the other day in a mom's group. If you know of places that are actual abortion clinics where someone can actually get an abortion, make sure that your friends and your people know so they don't go to one of those religious fake clinics, because
Yes.
that happened. Someone walked into one and did not know what they were walking into. So, I guess maybe that could be the last thing. Vicki, what is something to look for that should be a red flag for a fake clinic?
Well, what you'll usually see, they have these names like Day Spring and Day Health, and they like to call themselves women's health centers. And they often set up right across the street or right beside Planned Parenthood, hoping that people will walk in there by mistake. And we have had patients who have gone there first and would not let those people leave for hours. Now, of course, unless you're tying me down, I can still get up and walk out. But, in the South, we tend to be fairly polite. And if somebody's saying, just wait right here, I'll be right back with your results, we tend to stick around. But they start calling you mommy from the minute you walk in. They do ultrasounds, but they don't have trained or certified ultrasound providers. It's just somebody that's a volunteer doing an ultrasound. And they'll put words on the screen, "Hi, mommy," and all of this manipulation. They'll read scripture to you and show you all these awful videos and talk to you about how you're going to hell if you don't decide and have your baby. But make sure that the place you're going to it actually says Planned Parenthood or abortion clinic. And it's not one of these, if they say outside free ultrasound, free pregnancy test, but they don't mention abortion, don't go there. Call Planned Parenthood and we'll steer you to a safe place.
Yeah, it should honestly be criminal that they're allowed to exist. It's just makes my stomach hurt thinking about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, the last thing that I'd say to everybody is on the day of the Supreme Court hearing on December 1st, we're going to be planning activities around the state, in fact, all across the country, to lift up the situation, the court case, what's at stake. And so just watch us on social media and we'll let you know what's going on, how people can join in, what they can do to express their opinions. But we need everybody, all hands on deck to, we just need to speak up, and there's not enough people doing that.
Thank you so much for joining us. We will definitely keep an eye out for anything that's planned. And if there's anything that we can help you with, I know we'll be in contact. So
I will.
We'll definitely talk about it. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you. So thank you so much for joining us.
You too, Ashlyn and Sydney. I've enjoyed this. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good night. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.